earth was clean.
Well, picking a Supreme Court justice is one of the president's biggest responsibilities. Over the past half-century, there have been dozens of polls ranking our commander-in-chiefs. Now, usually you find the same names at the top: Lincoln, Washington, and Jefferson. But for several decades now, Siena College has been asking presidential scholars from across the country to share their thoughts, and repeatedly, they have come back with a different answer. In 82, 90, 94, and 2002, and now also in 2010, the survey has ranked FDR as the best president in our history. Tom Kelly is a professor of history and American studies at Siena College. He joins us now to talk more about this poll. How are you, Mr. Kelly?
Well, thank you.
So why do you think that is?
Well, we basically believe that a president to achieve greatness has to deal with at least one major problem, and he has to solve it satisfactorily. FDR is really the only president who dealt with two major problems during his time in office. In that, not quite 13 years, he dealt with the Great Depression and then, of course, with the events of the Second World War. So he has sort of a twofer as opposed to other presidents.
What is the purpose of this poll? I mean, you've been doing it for quite some time now. It seems very academic. Obviously, you're surveying experts. It's sort of like experts taking the temperatures of other experts on where they feel, how they feel about the field. What does that do for add to the general knowledge of people at large?
Well, first of all, it's a tracking study. So what we're able to do is to see how the perception of presidents changes in the minds of people who study presidents, teach about presidents, to some degree form the mind of America about what constitutes greatness in a presidency. For example, if you were to look at Harry Truman in 1953 or Dwight Eisenhower in 1961, each of them ranked very, very low. They were considered inept, essentially, as presidents. Now both are in the top 10. The idea is that we're almost 30 years now, but presumptively it goes on after we die. You'll be able to see when corners are turned, when opinions begin to change.
In the general consciousness, so it's not necessarily, it's just about a perception that changes. It's not necessarily about the performance of that particular president that
Yeah,
has
actually
changed.
it is.
Huh.
Because in effect, for example, Eisenhower was considered inept. He was considered a sort of benevolent, avuncular old man who played golf and that sort of stuff.
Right.
When the documents began to become available from the presidency, what people began to understand was that he was, in fact, running the presidency. It appeared that John Foster Dulles or his chief of staff, Sherman Adams, these were the people who were the movers and shakers. But in fact, it was Eisenhower. It was Eisenhower, for example, who decided that the United States would not commit troops to what was then French Indochina and is now Vietnam.
There's some surprising things in this poll, and I'll say what surprised us, and then you can tell me if you concur. First of all, Bush was 23rd in 2002 and has now fallen to 39th. That seems rather rapid of a drop. Why do you think that is? Basically,
when Bush left the presidency, the economic downturn was present and accelerating. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were still going on. The surge had just begun. There were people who believed the surge was a recipe for disaster. There were people who believed the surge would do wonderful things. But in effect, things looked relatively bleak. And so Bush is downrated as a result of that. The 23rd, by the way, you want to be careful of. Obama, for example, is 15th in this poll.
That seems high for someone who just walked in the door.
It's normal. One of the things that we've been impressed with is how cautious our professors are. They do not, in the first get-go, give people high ranks. They give them middle-of-the-road kind of ranks, so that people who are entering the presidency will usually end up between 15th and 20th. Bush ranked particularly low, but that was, of course, right after the hanging chads in Florida and the Supreme Court of the United States versus the Supreme Court of Florida and all of that sort of stuff. But even that was not that far. It's only 8 positions away.
But do you think that people are still blaming him, or that is what the historians are feeling or experts are feeling? That because certainly this must permeate the consciousness to some degree, because the Democrats are always saying, well, particularly when it comes to the White House, well, we inherited this mess and now we're trying to clean up the mess of the past. So it would seem actually not that, maybe a little counterintuitive, but perhaps not that counterintuitive, because somebody, when you keep hammering home this point that the guy who preceded you was actually the problem, that maybe that enters the consciousness of people.
It certainly does, but experts should be able to at least stand a little bit aside from that. And we, we tend to think they did, but we also, as a matter of reality, simply say that you can't judge very much on the first poll. We know what Bush is ranked the first year after he left the presidency. 2 times down the line, if he's still there, we can begin to say there might be stability. But we generally think it takes between 25 and 50 years before there is a stable point at which he's going to stay relatively the same.
Now, Bill Clinton, by contrast, was 18th and now has risen to 13th. Is that because of what he's done since he got out of office and the perception of his? I mean, I understand that the focus of this is really based on how that president did while they were in office. Mm-hmm. But then afterwards, his public profile is very high right now.
Yes, it is. And he's done well. He's done well on the kinds of charitable things he's done with the senior Bush.
Right, with Haiti, sure.
And let us say he's been more discreet since he left the presidency.
Personally speaking, you
yes. So as a result, he is effectively rewarded. He's also effectively rewarded because he was the president before George Bush. And since George Bush is in the doghouse, so to speak.
Right. Made him look awfully good. Yes, I understand. And I also am surprised that Reagan dropped, because Reagan is the guy that Republicans love to go back to.
But remember that Reagan only dropped from 16th to 18th, okay?
Well, that's still 2 places.
Yeah, but one place, you've got to fit in a new president every time we do this.
Oh, good point,
so,
right.
So in effect, there's really only one. Obama came in 15th, everybody moved down 1, and then the movement of a single position in the middle of the pack only requires a couple of people.
I also find it interesting that Obama does badly in background, family, education, and experience. What does that mean?
Well, background includes education experience.
Right.
Okay. So what we're really saying is that this is a kid who was raised by his grandparents. His father was virtually never present. The mother was a occasional presence. He's dragged all over the world. And this is not a recipe for stability, either academically or otherwise.
But how does that translate into a person's ability to lead, do you believe?
It may not necessarily, but it is part of a matrix of 20 questions that we think do create that. So, for example, Abraham Lincoln ranks low in background because his father was something of a ne'er-do-well. He himself suggested his stepmother, Nancy Hanks, had more responsibility than anybody else. He said, "All I am or ever will be, I owe to my angel mother," meaning his stepmother. That sort of thing, it brings you a low ranking because it reflects reality. If you were Thomas Jefferson, raised on a plantation, private tutors, William and Mary, you're going to get a different ranking than if you're Abraham Lincoln.
What is the most striking thing in this poll to you before I let you go?
I think the most striking thing is simply the degree of consistency. For almost 30 years now, the same 5 people have occupied the top 5 places.
Yeah, but some of that has to be also that they're so well known. I mean, particularly, obviously, experts know even the most obscure presidents, but Washington, everybody knows he's the father of our country, of course.
Sure, but they rank him 4th. So what you're really looking at is they take 20 questions. They rank president from 1 to 5 on each of 20 questions. They themselves, while they're doing that, unless they're doing an abacus or a calculator or something, don't know what the total is going to be until they get there. And so what we've attempted to do, and we think successfully, which is why we're pleased with the consistency, is to take what is in fact a series of qualitative judgments and make them as objective as possible. They cannot be completely objective. I mean, obviously, how do we determine that Thomas Jefferson is more intelligent than pick somebody, or vice versa? The answer is we look at education, we look at, in modern times, do they have an advanced degree, that sort of thing. But we're still making a qualitative judgment. I think he's smarter than Dwight Eisenhower was smart, or what will you?
Well, it is a fascinating poll, actually, and you can find the whole thing on the Siena website, I would
That's correct.
expect. And I want to thank you very much for coming in, Tom Kelly. It's
Nice
a pleasure.
to meet you.